Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So, we are continuing on after last week. We kind of take a break from the regular Torah portions during Passover week. So, now we are back to Leviticus. Miguel did talk about this week's portion a little bit last week. But there's a couple other things that kind of jumped out to me that I thought we could talk about. And then I kind of just wanted to talk about some of the structure of Leviticus as a whole, because it's something I really like. I've talked about it before, but I decided we could stand to talk about it again. So I do have a handout on the back table back there. And I'll try to remember, those of you that are here, if you can help me remember to direct people as they come in to grab one. I'll try to remember to mention it as well, but no promises. So we'll start out with our portion for this week, and then we'll kind of talk about the diagram on the handout a little bit later. So last week we had a really great conversation about kosher and food. So I do want to get back to that a little bit, because I think some of the points that Miguel was bringing out were really important. So I kind of like us to get back to that, but before we do that, I kind of want to go back and just pick up a couple other things from the first couple chapters of the portion. So we're in Leviticus 9. Chapters 9 through 11 are the portion for this week. So chapter 9 starts out with, we have the priests, because at the end of the previous portion, we have the consecration of the priests. So the tabernacle is set up. They've started to already get some of the instruction about the offerings and the sacrificial system. And now we actually have the priests set in, which is interesting that it doesn't start with the priests being set in. If they have the sacrificial system that the priests have to administrate, it's kind of interesting that that we didn't start there. But when we get to some of the structure of Leviticus a little bit later, I think actually some of that will make a little bit of sense as to why it might be organized this way in the scripture. But in chapter 9, we actually have the priests actually beginning the ministry in the tabernacle. So again, we have, Miguel brought out the point that it happened on the 8th day. So it's this, 8th days are kind of new beginnings in scripture, because of course 7 is kind of the completeness and the Shabbat, and then with 8 we begin again. So which Tom likes to talk about. That's what Tom loves talking about when we get to the fall feast, the 8th day at the end of Sukkot, being this gathering of all the nations and this kind of prophetic looking toward the new heavens and new earth, and the completed plan of redemption and restoration, which is pretty great, but we don't need to.
In the Jewish way of thinking, is the 8th day, would that be considered Saturday then?
No, it would be Sunday.
Sunday.
Yeah, because the 7th day would be Saturday. Yeah, the week would start on Sunday.
Right.
So yeah. Yeah. So as it talks about the priests, of course, we have more blood and guts. lots of sacrifice it this way, slaughter it this way, splash the blood here, do this with the fat and the kidneys and the liver and all of that, and it's a little bit, I don't know. I'm a city girl for sure, and I have never been around the process of slaughtering animals to, definitely not to sacrifice, but even to eat. And so I read all this and I'm a little bit like, no thanks, I'd rather go to the grocery store. Yes?
I worked at a slaughterhouse.
Oh, goodness.
First thing I saw when I walked in every morning was a row of skinned heads hanging on hooks.
Oh, goodness.
And the place did reek.
Uh-huh.
But after about 20 minutes, you don't notice it anymore.
Right. Yeah. Which is an interesting thing, right? Like I'm like, hey, it's kind of the Lord that we have that ability to get used to those smells, because because having to be aware of the terrible smell all day would probably be pretty unpleasant. So maybe that's one of the that's kindness of the Lord that we can kind of just get used to that and move on from it. But that's interesting. That would be an interesting sight to greet you each morning. So with the setting in of the priests, I honestly I don't have a whole lot to say about the process of all the blood and the kidneys and the fat and the skins and I don't have a whole lot to say about all of that. So I'm sorry if that disappoints you a little bit, but
Well, once you're proficient, it's really not as messy as one would think.
yes, that's true. Yes, they're well practiced at this process because they do it every day, multiple times a day. So they got good at it really quickly. But what's interesting is at the end of this, with all of the blood and guts. Yes, there's a handout back there on the table.
Okay.
Grab one of those. The end of chapter 9, verse 23. Moses and Aaron then went back into the tent of meeting. When they came back out and blessed the people, the glory of Adonai appeared to all the people. Fire came out from the presence of Adonai and devoured the burnt offering and the fat on the altar. And when the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. So all of this consecration and this process of establishing the priesthood results in this manifest glory of the Lord, which is, and again, we see the fire coming out of the presence, which I think we maybe talked about this a little bit more last week, but I just want us to be making the connection to this fire reality with the presence of God in their midst, because my guess, my interpretation maybe, is that when the fire came down on the altar in the tabernacle, they had just recently, a year ago, I think maybe, now I'm forgetting the timeline a little bit, not so distant history was Sinai, right? Where they saw the fire come down on the top of the mountain. Of course, only Moses is up at the top. We have the priests in the middle, and then we have everybody else kind of around the base of the mountain. And, which of course the priests weren't really priests yet, but there's this group of people that's allowed to go up, is the point. At least part way. And so, but everybody sees the fire on the come down, right? Everybody sees the fire, and everybody sees the earthquake and the lightning and things like that. So we're getting to this point where we're starting to see the Lord, the presence and the glory of the Lord. Thank you, Sandy. Connected with fire. And so we've talked about it a little bit before, and we can talk about a little bit more about it again if it's helpful. That the tabernacle essentially becomes this traveling Sinai with them. It follows the same pattern as Sinai, and it has the same three-part construction as Sinai. Excuse me. And so it's this traveling Sinai in the midst of the people. So this fire connection is significant with that. So moving on to chapter 10, we have this unauthorized fire, and this is an interesting event to study and an interesting kind of episode. There's lots of things that raise a lot of questions in this story, because of course this is Aaron's sons. So these are if Aaron is the high priest, his sons of course are part of this priestly line, and it doesn't tell us if one of these is his firstborn, but if he was, he would be the one who would be next in line, right? So this is a big deal. And they bring this unauthorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them, it says. So, and then again, fire comes out from the presence of the Lord, but this time it consumes them, right? So I think this is actually, for me, this is a really good picture of what the fear of the Lord looks like, right? Because we have fire coming with glory, which causes causes a reaction, right? They fall on their faces when this fire of glory comes. And then just right after that, we have fire coming again in this consuming way. And so it's the same fire of the Lord, but it has very different result in different ways. So for me, this is a good picture of the fear of the Lord, because the fear of the Lord brings the awe of his glory, but it also kind of gives us this idea that he can consume us, right? And people have a really hard time with that idea that the Lord would do this. But I think more so than trying to figure out exactly why the Lord might bring this consuming fire, I think looking at what caused it is more significant. And again, I know we talked about some of this last week, but I think it's worth continuing to talk about, because I think these are a big deal. These are big deal moments. So, of course, it's the unauthorized fire. And we talked a little bit last week about how we don't actually even know exactly what that meant. We don't know. Did they make their censer and make it more ornate than the sense, than anything else that was in the tabernacle? What did they do that made it unauthorized is the question. And the reality is we don't have an answer. But the point is that, yeah, go ahead.
Except for the fact that he says that he didn't command it.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, and that's the point. Yeah, and that's where I was going, is because
whatever they did, whether they were drunk or not or whatever, it's still it
Yeah.
wasn't
They
commanded.
weren't told to do it.
right, exactly. And I think and just really the Lord, and that this is one of the things I love about the tabernacle and about the instructions given in Leviticus, is that God is very specific, but in a way that is accessible, if that makes sense. Because yes, they bring, of course they have just brought all of their wealth, basically. They've just brought all of the gold and silver and bronze and the threads and they just brought all the things, right, to make the tabernacle beautiful. But the daily offerings and their daily process and how they get to encounter the presence of the Lord how do I say it? It's possible for everyone, right? And that's why as we go through, I love when the Lord gives kind of you bring the lamb, you bring the perfect lamb, but if you can't afford a lamb, you bring a turtle dove. And if you can't afford that, you bring grain. He's like, no one is going to, there's not going to be barriers to entry, basically. But at the same time, it does cost you something. No one gets to come without something. But it's just that there's no barrier. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I think and again, one of the main points of Torah that we often miss because we don't tend to study other ancient cultures and texts and things like that, is that the Torah is showing that the God of Israel and what he requires is very different from any other God at the time. Because other gods require gold, but they're trying to earn the favor of the other gods. When the God of Israel is just like, I just want to be with you, but I'm holy, and so we have to. Wow. There has to be an exchange of some kind, right? And there has to be, and it's also just the awareness, right? When we are participating and it costs us something, we engage with it a much different way than if it's just
costs you nothing.
Yeah, than if it costs you nothing. But at the same time, I just don't want us to think they're bringing their offerings to earn his favor. That's not what they're doing.
Wow.
So let that not ever enter our minds that that's what they're doing, because they're having fellowship, which is what I love about it. A couple weeks ago, Lori brought the handout that Tom made a couple years ago that goes through all the different types of sacrifices, and most of them are not about sin. Most of them, yes, there are sacrifices for sin. Which is, again, the kindness of the Lord. That's you screw up, which there's no sacrifice for intentional sin. Also remember that. But at the same time, we're not perfect humans. So there are sacrifices to make restitution and to bring us back into right alignment with how God wants us to live. But most of the sacrifices are about fellowship. They're to be a fragrant offering to the Lord. They're and if everybody's bringing them together, like, you're with your people, right? I think sometimes I used to have this idea of like going to the temple. I don't know why I had this. I don't know why this is where my imagination used to go when I was growing up or whatever and would hear about this. But it's like I almost had this picture of like you go one at a time to bring your sacrifice. But that's not at all what's happening. Everybody's doing it together, And so, and it's like, yes, there's the main altar, but it's like, but if you think about it, particularly things like Passover and things like that, thousands of people, particularly thinking like in Jerusalem once the temple is there. The temple Mount complex is large. It's very large. So the temple of itself takes up kind of a smaller portion of it, and there's all this space around it. What's that space for? It's for people to be, right? People to be fellowshipping. And you can kind of imagine if everybody's bringing their lambs on Passover, it's kind of like kind of maybe sort of organized chaos up there if you've got all these people and all these lambs up there while people are kind of waiting to go have their sacrifice their lamb. It was probably a little bit crazy. Like, it's not just this quiet one single person moment. It's like there's noise, there's movement, there's animals, there's all the things that come with having animals around. It's like craziness. So it's like it's about being together, right? It's this communal experience. All of this system is about being together and being in the presence of the Lord.
And when you were talking about the sacrifices, even the sin sacrifice, tell me if I'm wrong, but it's like it, in my mind, prepares you for the others.
Yeah.
Because you have to be, somewhat holy, the sin dealt with.
Yeah.
In order to then come with the fellowship, come with the others.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It puts you back in the right.
Yeah.
In the right order, so that you can participate in the rest of the system. That's really good.
Yeah, I never knew that there was only one sin offering. I didn't know that everything else was fellowship.
Yeah.
That's wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I did not know that.
Yeah. Which is why Tom likes to say, which I don't know. I don't know that all of because Tom likes to talk about the sacrifice like it's like barbecue. Like we think that it's like really gross and whatever. And parts of it I think are. Like I think when they're burning some of the fat and the skin, which not all of that is actually burned in the Temple Mount. A lot of it's taken outside in the context of the tabernacle, kind of outside the camp. They do take some of the not so great smelling. So, but a lot of it is roasting meat. And so Tom likes to say it's like barbecue. It's like being at a barbecue all the time.
Right.
Which is a nice way to think about it. I don't know. And then you have the incense, and so I'm like, Lord, okay, so did you think about this? Of course he did. But it's like that the smell of the incense and the smell of all this meat, does that go together well? I just wonder. I don't know. I know that's kind of silly,
no, that's a very good question because I know incense burning.
Because sometimes that's a hard thing, right?
Yeah, that is very hard. You can have
smells that I like this smell and I like this one. I don't want them together.
Yes, it's conflicting.
Yeah.
Well, and that smell though was
right.
very particular.
Right.
Like when you smelled it, the only place that incense was allowed to be burned was before the Lord. So
yes.
It signified a sacred place.
For sure.
The same way, even with all the applying of the blood, it didn't go on the people.
Right.
It went on his sacred space. So many times, like growing up, it was like, the blood washes away your sin, but the blood in the tabernacle was being applied to keep his sacred space holy.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's kind of like of course, I've been loving that Who Shall Ascend the Mountain
It's
book.
so good.
And I was looking at the parallels since you're talking about this offering, the fire. He goes through the parallels of when the Lord's fire came out. In verse 9, where it says Moses and Aaron went in, at the very end of it, went into the tent meeting, and they came back to bless the people. The glory of Adonai appeared to all the people, and fire came out from the presence of Adonai. It was his fire, it devoured it. And it said, and all the people saw it, and they shouted, and they fell on their faces. Now they present the strange fire.
Yeah.
Everything's quiet, everything's silent, even Aaron can't say anything.
Yeah.
So we're looking at like the difference between it when it's the Lord's fire and he initiates this, or when it's a man-made fire.
Right.
And because it's like, the Lord starts the fire.
Right.
We're supposed to maintain it, but for them to offer strange fire, strange whatever, means they initiated it, he
Right.
didn't.
Right.
And it's, again, then the response to that is, because I'm holy, and that's when, Aaron has said, you need to teach these people between holy and
Right.
unholy, and
Right.
clean and unclean.
Yes.
And
Yes. Which I want to talk about some of that.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't want to jump ahead.
No, you're
but-
good. You're good. Yeah, because the interesting thing about it, we're sitting here having like all these ideas about what their motivation was to bring the strange fires, but it doesn't tell us. Which part of me is like, I wonder if that's so that we can. I don't know. So that we can think about it and ponder. And I think if we let it, I'm going to suggest it'll bring up in our own hearts what would cause us to bring our own quote unquote strange fire. Because the reality is, they did it in a way that was not as God commanded. So maybe they were trying to earn something. Maybe they were trying to prove themselves to other people. Maybe they were, maybe, who knows?
Yeah.
But something in their heart said, I can take what God said and I can add to it. Right?
Yeah.
Whatever that actually looked like. Something in their heart said, I can do this myself. Right? Which goes back to, it always takes me back to the garden of that lie of there's something being withheld from us that we have that God doesn't, right? Which is like, I don't know. I can't even explain what that does inside me. It's just like, oh Lord, keep me in check, right? Because that's the lie of the serpent is like, there's something that you don't know, but if you eat this, then you'll be like God, right? That's what the serpent says to Eve. He doesn't want you to do this because then you'll be like him. So it's this lie that we can ever be like God. Yes, we are made in his image, but we are not God.
Right.
Yes, he wants to be with us and he wants to use us to establish his kingdom, but we are not God. And it's very important that we remember that. And you hear that said and you're like, of course I'm not God. But we all have those moments where it's like, God said this, but you're like, but this makes more sense to me. Right? I think we all come up with those moments, which I think maybe is some version of what's happening here. God said this, but I want to do this, and this makes sense. And maybe it was they've seen all these other cultures and their sacrificial systems, because every culture had a sacrificial system at this time. And they're like, well, they all do this. We probably need to do that too. And God is like,
when they
no.
adopted a king,
Mm-hmm.
He's like, they were like, all the other nations have a king.
I know.
And he's like, no, I'm your king.
Right.
It's funny how the Lord always told them not to look at what the nations are doing.
Right.
As they were pursuing the land.
Right.
Do not do what the people before you were doing. It's
Right.
like he was sanctifying him versus all the other nations. But there was always a temptation for them to do
Exactly.
what the other nations were doing.
Yeah. And his kindness is that he makes a way for it to work. Because he talks about that. And when you ask me for a king, he's like, I really want you to just serve me. But when you ask me for a king, he kind of lays out how that can work. And we see the same thing play out with David when David's like, Lord, I live in this palace and you have a tent. And the Lord's like, this is all I asked for. But eventually it's like, okay, you can build me a house. And of course, we know the story. It ends up not being David, but Solomon who builds it, which is also a whole issue.
Right.
And when you go through all the kings, that's what's amazing is you go through all the kings. There are kings who honor the Lord and kind of rule in the way that he designed. He's like, if you're going to have a king, you have to do it like this. That's why he says that the kings have to write the Torah. If they're going to be he's like, you can have a king, but they got to know what I say. And the ones who don't do that, it doesn't go well, right? And we watch this kind of tennis match almost of the righteous king and the unrighteous king, and the righteous king and the unrighteous. We watch this bounce back and forth, and it's a mess.
Right.
But he knew it was going to happen because he says, he's like, if you, again, this is what one of the sections I love, like in Deuteronomy, like towards the end, it's like he starts talking about like, if you serve me, you will be established in the land, you will have your inheritance, it will go well for you. But when, he doesn't say but if, he says, but when you look to the other nations, when you look for this, that, and the other, the land will spit you out. But I will always bring you back. So, and then we watch that tension play out through all of history. We're still watching it. We're still watching this play out. The story's not over yet. We still got a lot of issues. But that's the faithfulness of the Lord. And I was thinking about, the Lord kept bringing to mind on Wednesday when we had our service for the end of Passover. The Lord kept bringing to mind the verse it's a couple of different places actually. It's in the Deuteronomy and also in Joshua, but it talks about, I am Adonai in the heavens above and the earth below, there is no other. And so it just this like, there is no one like him. And that where he says it in Deuteronomy is right after he's gone through this whole, if you're obedient, I will bless you, but when you're not, all this will happen. But then your hearts will turn. When you're scattered across the world, your hearts will turn and I will bring you back. Which is like, I have like goosebumps right now. It gets me. Like, because he's so faithful. It's like he's not, like his plan is big enough and he is powerful enough to keep his promises through all of our crazy messes. And like that, it's amazing to me. Anyway, back to Strange Fire. Back to Leviticus.
That was a great bunch.
Here we are. That was worth it. So yeah, I think the response of the Lord is really interesting. I want us to notice a couple things about this story, because there's something actually that I noticed as I read through it this week that I don't know that I had really fully understood before. So of course they offer it. The fire of the Lord comes and consumes them. Adonai speaks, to those who are near me, I will show myself holy. Upon the faces of all the people, I will be glorified. And Aaron kept silent. And like we said, we don't know what Aaron was doing before. If he was angry, if he was, speaking out in anger towards the Lord for taking his sons, if he was justifying, if he was defending, if he was what, we don't know. We don't know what Aaron was saying, but that the word of the Lord made him quiet. Unto the glory of the Lord. And then this next verse is what got me a little bit. Then Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, probably not saying those names right, the sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, come near, carry your relatives away from the front of the sanctuary to outside the camp. So they drew near and carried them, still in their tunics, outside the camp, as Moses had said. So this is interesting. So this is Aaron's uncle, the sons of Aaron's uncle. So Aaron's cousins coming out. So we don't know this uncle. We don't know which side, right?
Yes, we do.
Do we?
If he's Aaron's uncle and not Moses'
Oh, you're right.
uncle,
Then it would be his wife's.
yeah.
That's fair. I can go with that. Regardless, it doesn't really matter. The point is, it's part of the family, but it's not in the high priestly line. And so I don't know that I ever noticed this before, and maybe this doesn't matter so much, but I realized that Aaron, because it's not just that Aaron didn't get to bury his sons, because it became tradition and it became the ruling that the priests do not touch the dead. Like this is a very sobering thing. Like priests, even all the way through, as far as I know, I'm not an expert, but from what I know, they don't attend funerals. Even, and there's even some I've heard even in the modern day that if they, people with the last name of Cohen and things like that are understood to be from this priestly family. It's hard to say, but and I don't want to get into the details of all that genealogy, but some of them will still not attend funerals unless it's like their mother, father, son, or, you know, like a very close family member, because they're not to come in contact with the dead. Why? What does that do to them?
Makes them unclean.
It makes them unclean.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't really even realized like that this is kind of the start of that from the very beginning. That seems to be how it is that even Aaron doesn't get to be part of burying his sons, which of course part of this is just because of the situation itself, that God doesn't actually allow the full mourning process. He doesn't allow them to tear their clothes, or he doesn't allow them to do all these things that were part of their mourning process. But at the same time, they do. They don't get to do all of these things, but at the same time, in verse 6, it says, "But let your kinsmen, the whole house of Israel, mourn over the burning that Adonai has kindled." But I think the mourning is over the grief of how do I say it? The tendency of the human heart to do something that God has not commanded.
Can we go back to verse 5
Uh-huh.
for a sec here?
Sure.
When they make it, Moses makes it a point to say they carried them still in their tunics.
Mm-hmm.
Still in their tunics, where they were apparently burned to death by fire.
Yeah.
What happened to the tunics? Nothing.
Yeah.
Apparently, it was an interesting.
It is an interesting, yeah, because it's kind of like because we hear consuming fire. Yeah, to me that means
Consumed.
Yeah.
they're gone.
You're gone, yeah.
But apparently they weren't gone. They were there to still be buried. So I don't know. That door has been sticking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to come in just now, and that's why I came in this door.
Yeah, when
So-
I came in, I had to come in this way. It really stuck for some reason. It's not locked. I checked it this morning. It's just really stuck. Sorry. Should have left it propped open a little bit. Yes. So whatever this consuming fire of God is.
That one works.
Good morning. For some reason that door is sticking this morning.
It's got a key lock on it.
Well, it's not locked.
Oh,
It's not locked. It's
Yes.
just stuck
It's not working.
for some reason. So what are we talking about? I don't even know. Anyway, this consuming of the Lord.
Well, it does, if once, we really wanted you to come in.
Hey, I was stuck out there too.
You have to work for it. You have to work to be at Torah study this morning.
Good morning.
Nothing in life is free. You have to work for it. You have to work for it. I'm just kidding. Anyway, but yeah, that's an interesting thing. Okay, we're gonna move on because otherwise I'm just gonna get stuck here all day.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
For me. Going on further where do not uncover your head or tear your
Mhm.
clothes, or you may die, for he will be,
Mhm.
do you feel like just looking at that, to mourn them for doing something they shouldn't have done, would you view that as the reason the Lord didn't want him to mourn them is because it would be like, in that sense, saying that the Lord had done something wrong by consuming them? So it would have put what the Lord wants you to do this way. If you're mourning somebody who didn't do what he asked you to do, it's almost like you're saying that maybe the Lord had done something
Wrong.
unjust,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're
That makes a lot of
putting a
sense.
higher priority on the person that just died rather than on the Lord being in your midst. Have you looked at it that way?
I do see something of that, because I do think the mourning is commanded toward mourning that the Lord had to intervene in that way. So yeah, I think that the traditional mourning over the sons, I think, does kind of let it kind of fester in your heart of like, this is unjust.
Yeah. How could God do
How
that?
could God do this?
Right.
Right? And I think we have all, I think about this sometimes, because this this can be a difficult thing. Even, I mean, of course, this is a very dramatic scene. Of course, this happens because they're doing something that God has not commanded. But I have bold testimony at this moment, have had moments when somebody has died and I've been like, Lord, this is not right. Particularly children or things like that. I mean, even, this is a different scenario, of course, but it still kind of hits that place sometimes that I'm like, it is like one of the most unjust things in the world is that parents have to bury their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I do not feel that should ever happen. I feel like that is unjust in the kingdom. And that's part of the broken world that we live in.
You probably think so too.
Right. And I have processed this with the Lord, particularly in areas of, particularly small children or just, even if they're not small children, just this scenario of the Lord. I'm just like, the Lord is like, my heart is grieving too. This is...
That's good to know.
That
you said that he grieves too, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, okay, Lord. As long as this is going to be made right someday, okay, Lord, I'll stick it out. But it's like, but this is a hard thing. But I do think in this scenario there is this aspect of like not letting something grow in their hearts that's going to turn them towards the Lord, that the Lord is being unfair, meaning the righteousness of humanity is more than the righteousness of the Lord.
Yeah.
You can't let that happen, particularly in this stage when they're still building relationship with him. They're still learning how the right way to worship him. There can't be any leeway, right? It's kind of like you're like when you're helping someone, like you start out typically with really strict rules when you're trying to like enforce a boundary or help children learn how to behave a certain way. You start out really strict. It's like, no, you do it like this. But then sometimes there becomes some leeway, right, as time goes on. But the Lord, and the Lord doesn't have leeway with how he's worshipped, so don't hear me saying that. But this is particularly like, no, I said this. You don't get to interpret it for yourself. You do what I say.
Right.
Because it's going to be better for you, right? It's not just because he's trying to exert power over them. It's because this is the best way.
Right.
This is actually what's going to be best for all of us. Okay, moving on. This is a good question. Okay, so they continue on. What time is it? Here we go. So, where do I want to go here? Okay, so I want to kind of come back to this. I know we're switching topics a little bit, and then we're going to get to my little diagram here in a minute. Switching topics just a little bit to. Oh, there's one more thing. This is why I have notes, guys. It helps if I actually look at them. At the end of chapter 10, before we switch topics, so it's gone through, they're continuing to go through this and that kind of the aftermath of this scenario. And Moses is not happy with Aaron for a little bit here. So it says that, let's see. So Aaron doesn't eat the sin offering that was commanded that the priests are supposed to eat. And Moses is unhappy with Aaron about that Aaron didn't do that. So in verse 19, Aaron said to Moses, "Behold, today they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before Adonai. When things like these have happened to me, would it have been good in the eyes of Adonai if I had eaten the sin offering today?" When Moses heard this, it was good in his eyes. That's a really interesting situation.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is really going on there? What do you think is really happening here?
Aaron is defending his sons.
Is Aaron defending his sons?
Well, that's my first thought.
But if he was defending his sons, would Moses have said it was good in his eyes?
Because of what he said, it was Moses. He acknowledged that it was just. It was fine. He definitely backed up.
Okay.
If Aaron has any kind of anger or resentment in his heart at the moment because of his son's dying, he wouldn't be clean to eat it.
Okay.
And also, I kind of read it too, where it's like, Aaron Aaron's sons, like, he failed as a dad, in a sense.
Sure.
You know, so his son's sins, it's like, if I'm eating this sin offering, I think he was identifying himself in the midst of, you know, I obviously didn't raise my kids right. I mean, because I'm still thinking about the fact that they were in there for 7 days getting their hands filled by the Lord. They couldn't leave that. And then they put their hand to something, and it's like, there was a disconnect there. And I think right now, Aaron is so reeling in whatever that he can't present himself as the right kind of priest. He's probably going through so much, like I said, psychologically on things, that for me to do this in this position, I'm not in the right place to do it. Look what my kids have done, look what's just happened today, and this all happened in a really short period of time.
Yeah, it did.
So, yeah, I think he probably is like, I'm just not really worthy to do this right now.
Is that what he's saying there? I didn't get anything in 19, I don't know, didn't understand what it is he was trying to say.
Yeah, so he's basically, he's justifying to Moses why he's not eating. So the part of the process of the sin offering is there's a part of it that priests eat, which is thought of as being like they're taking on the weight of the sin of the person who's offering it, and it's being released to the Lord and helping, and that's part of that process. So he's refusing to eat the sin offering because of the condition of his heart, which is what we're trying to understand what that is. And Moses is angry with him because it's like, you were told you're supposed to eat this and you're not doing it, so why not? So this is Aaron's explanation back to Moses of why he's not doing what was commanded. And Moses ultimately understands. I do see it more of this, I think that Aaron is feeling the weight of the sin in such a way that he can't eat the sin offering. I would not be comfortable saying that he's defending his sons, because this entire narrative is, you must not mourn for them. You must not have anything that is justifying what they did. But there's still the reality that a father has lost his sons. So there is some tension in there. But I don't think he's defending the action of his sons, because I think that's exactly what the Lord is saying, that's not okay, and I don't think Moses would accept that.
Well, I fully accept that, but I'm still questioning, these are his other 2 sons. He's already lost 2 sons. And now, Aaron had 4 sons, right?
Yeah, but 2 of them are still with him.
Okay.
And they're not eating either.
Right.
And I thought that's what he was defending, the fact that the other 2 sons.
No, he still has the other
Okay.
2 with him. Yeah, no, it's just the first 2, because then as it goes on, up in verse 12, Moses spoke to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar, his surviving sons, and commands them to do all of this.
Someone can get in again.
So, there we go. You might not just don't let it close all the way. Put the little thing down. Put the little stopper thing down. Thank you. So his other 2 sons are still with him. So this is still in reference to the 2 sons that offered the unauthorized fire.
Oh. I guess that's what I misunderstood.
Okay.
I guess I'm, okay.
Do you feel like since well, I can understand Moses' frustration, like coming in here and going, once again, you people aren't doing what you were asked to do. I mean,
Right.
I could see why Moses was
Sure.
irritated, you know,
Right.
it's like, your sons did this, now you were told to do something and you didn't do it, and I'm sure Moses at this point is like, the Lord actually agreed to dwell in the midst with us. He told you that you're stiff-necked people, and if he dwelt with you, he'd devour you. So he's setting up a system here so he doesn't have to destroy you. And now, all the system I've given you, you're not doing. But yeah, with Aaron, I can definitely see as the priest, they go in, they're that intermediary between the people. They're representing the people to the Lord, they're representing the Lord to the people, and Aaron's had a really bad day.
He has. He has.
And so this representative thing that he's supposed to step into, he's struggled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he's like, I feel like he's just saying, my heart ain't right. And Moses is like, yeah, it's not. That's probably a good thing to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of, I feel like Aaron is feeling the weight of what's happened, and he knows his own heart, and he knows the danger of
Yeah.
coming before the Lord not in the right manner.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't, he doesn't want to be consumed by the Lord.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good. Okay, so trying to decide which direction I want to go. So I think we'll kind of pause here a little bit. I was going to maybe go back into some of the chapter 11 that we started talking about because I loved, but I'll just briefly kind of summarize because I think the way that Miguel talked about this last week was really, really good. And then we'll go, and there is a handout on the back table over here of a diagram that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. So if you don't have one of those.
Where are we at?
We're in Leviticus 11.
Thank you.
So so this, of course, this chapter is all about what can be eaten and what can't be. But what I loved about, we're not going to talk about food, because let me make a comment about food in the Bible, is that the passages about food are often not about food.
Yeah.
And it's actually really important.
Uh-huh.
So yes, he is instructing you are to eat this and not eat this. But why? What's the point?
Yeah.
Unto what? And this is what Miguel did such a great job of explaining last week. Is it's unto relationship with the Lord. And it's a little bit, it is a little bit of the, like he kind of presented some of the main views of like, was it for health? Was it for, because of diseases, because of whatever? Maybe. But it's actually just because that's what he said. And so, and particularly in the Messianic movement, this becomes a very messy conversation. We're not going to follow the rabbit all the way down the trail. We're just going to acknowledge that it exists for a minute, and then we're going to move on. But because when we get in, because this is something that gets extended, taking things like this, and I'm not saying that Jewish people are not to follow this, but often in the Messianic world, this gets a little bit funny. That it's like, if you're part of a Messianic congregation or whatever, then you are to follow all the biblical kosher, which is different than rabbinic kosher, also not a rabbit we're going to chase. But when we get to things like Acts 10, which I just saw a post. It was just like a little Instagram post. I actually can't even remember who it was from right now. It's someone it might have been a worship leader, it might have been a teacher. I honestly can't remember who it was that posted it. I just remember coming across a post recently when somebody was just like, made kind of almost an offhand comment that like, and because of Acts 10, we know we can eat bacon. I'm like, that's actually not what it says.
It sure doesn't.
Acts 10 is not about food. And we know that because Peter says, why are you showing me this, Lord? He does. If it had been about food, he would have seen it and been like, all right, cool, kosher doesn't matter. That's not what he said, and it's about people. And then we get to Acts 15, and again, God's instruction, there are instructions about food, but it's not about keeping kosher. So I'm not saying that there are not Gentiles who are not called to uphold some level of kosher for various reasons, and I've heard some really good reasons for that, and I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not saying what the right thing is. I'm saying that sometimes we put too much emphasis on food. And it's about the Lord. And this goes back to, this is about clean and unclean. Does unclean equal sin?
You said no last time.
It does not. And I will say that as many times as I possibly can find ways to say it, because we have to break that connection in our minds. However, in the context where there is a tabernacle or temple standing, is it sin to enter into those places while unclean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
This
However,
is so deep.
I know. Is it a sin to be unclean if you're not going in the tabernacle?
No.
Okay, thank you. Good job, everybody. You listened well. You've listened well. So, yes.
And Aaron's job right here is to teach the people what's clean and unclean, what's
Right.
holy and what's common, and it's basically for the purpose of being able to enter the Lord's presence.
Right,
It is,
exactly.
it's all about the relationship
Exactly.
thing. It's not about what they're doing out there in the field. It's about, you know, the ability for him to be able to dwell in their midst, and for them to acknowledge how holy it is that he dwells in their
Yes.
midst.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that's like, I find it really fascinating, the very first thing, when he tells them, you're gonna go teach these people stuff, the first thing he does is teaches though on the eating habits
Yes.
of the people.
Yes.
And, you know, if you do this, or if you touch it, you know,
Mhm.
how, and most of it's like, and if you do come in contact with something dead, you're only unclean till nighttime.
Right.
You know, it's not like you're messed up for life or for the
Right.
next week.
Right.
I mean, every day, it's like that mercies are new every morning. Every
Mhm.
day it's extended that, okay, we can hit reset and start all over again.
Yes. Yeah, and it's like, and again, going back to this, we have to break this connection between unclean and sin,
Yeah.
is that there's always a set time frame, it's a day. There's other times talking about different things that sometimes it's a week or something like that. But a lot of the things that make you unclean are about life and blood, usually.
Mhm.
And so when we get to some of those passages, I'm sure we'll have yet another conversation about this. So look forward to that. But again, the Lord also makes allowances for that, because his desire is for people to come in. And there's not supposed to be shame on people who are unclean. Because this is why, even thinking about Passover, since we just had Passover, that's why there's the instruction about the second Passover a month later, is so that those who are unclean when Passover happened can still celebrate the Passover. It's so important,
Mhm.
Wow.
right?
Wow. The second Passover.
And we don't have this practice today, but we also don't have a temple. We don't have a lot of things. but the point is that being unclean does not prevent you from eventually coming back into the presence of the Lord and being unclean for this period, for this day or whatever. Because it's also like the Lord is also really practical, honestly.
Mhm.
Like, he knows, like, there's going to be carcasses that have to be dealt with. People are going to die, and somebody needs to.
In your house, and it's
Right.
out of your control.
Right. So it's like, and honestly, like, culturally, there's a lot of honor for those people who do deal with the dead, because they're basically sacrificing their ability to go into the presence of the Lord. Like, that's a big deal. That's actually a high honor. And so we need to not look at this clean and unclean thing as like, if you're unclean, you're less than, right? We have this really Western mindset that likes to build hierarchies out of everything, and God is not doing that. So let's not read that into what's going on here.
Mhm.
I know I tend to talk about this a lot, but I think it's really important. Okay, so that's really all I want to say about this kosher issue. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of it. I want to talk about this fun little diagram because it makes me really happy. So, so now that we're partway into, and actually what's interesting about this week's portion is as you look at this, and I'll explain the thought and the design of this in just a second. But if you look on the left side, as we're going up the left side of this diagram, the portion that we have this week kind of bridges two categories. And I think it's very easy to see that happening in the text. So before we get into that more, let me just explain what's going on in this diagram a little bit. So of course, this is a diagram of the Torah. This is from a book called Who Shall Ascend the Mountain of the Lord by Michael Morales, which is a delightful book about Leviticus. But this is one of he has several different diagrams and structures where he's showing how the structure of Leviticus fits in. But it's this idea that if we can look at the Torah as a mountain, which is sort of what's signified with this diagram here, that as we go up one side, we eventually reach the summit. The top of the mountain is the Day of Atonement, which is in Leviticus 16, and then we come back down the other side. And as you can see, going up the left side, we have this theme of blood, and I want to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And as we go down the other side, we have this theme of holiness, and the pivot point of that is the perfect representation of both in the Day of Atonement. So, and the Day of Atonement being the pivot point of the Torah is like commonly held by most scholars. There are some who argue for some other passages, but this one has the most agreement on it. So this is not just this person's. This is kind of a cool way to show this. This is actually like lots of scholars agree about this. So of course we kind of as we look at this, also we should see parallels. So yes, the main theme of going up the left side is blood. The main theme on the right side is holiness. But we see parallels of themes through some of these things. So the idea is that Genesis and Deuteronomy would be at the lowest level. These are both narrative books, getting broad themes, and they have a lot of parallels in them. Exodus and Numbers also a little bit higher up the mountain, but also have a lot of parallel themes with different emphasis is kind of the idea here. And then with Leviticus, because of course the book that this came from is about Leviticus, he breaks that down in more detail, which is helpful for our purposes. We see these parallels as within the book of Leviticus as well, with these different categories. So I think this is helpful for me sometimes, because sometimes, as much as I love the book of Leviticus, I also get kind of caught in the and you're to do this and this and this and this and this, and I'm like, what are we talking about right now? So I like these breakdowns. I think it's a helpful roadmap a little bit too. So we know, of course, that we started out the book of Leviticus with instruction about the order and what's happening in the tabernacle, right? And so that makes sense with this category of sanctuary laws, and we'll see it come up again at the end of the book of Leviticus as well. And then we move into the priestly laws, which we talked about and we started with in this week's portion, picking up chapter 8 from last week, and then 9 and 10 this week. We very much saw that, right? We very much saw the consecration of the Kohanim, the beginning of their ministry, and even then a little bit of the disruption of the unholy or unauthorized fire, and how they navigated that situation. And then with chapter 11, we see this moving into the personal laws. This is like, okay, this is what everybody needs to do so that we can maintain this presence of God. And then ultimately going up to the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16, which I just love so much. And it's this perfect, as much as you do, it's never enough because he's so holy. Right. And so we have this perfect interaction of the blood being sacrificed and also his holiness coming, with the high priest entering into the Holy of Holies. And there's a verse in there that I didn't look up, I could probably find it, but that talks about all the nations getting to come. It starts to being that, in 16:29, is a statute to you forever that in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you are to afflict your souls and do no kind of work, both the native born and the outsider dwelling among you. So this is like an all play scenario. It's like we're doing this so that everyone can experience this cleansing of the Lord, which is just really wonderful, in my opinion. And then we'll see it kind of go back down the other side. So I hope this is helpful to you, as far as kind of a little bit of a roadmap for the Torah, and then but Leviticus in particular because people tend to have struggles with Leviticus. Yeah.
So I have a question. All throughout some of the Psalms, David's always talking about statutes and precepts and judgments. Are those specific books, or were they in Leviticus, the statutes, the precepts? I've always wondered what he was alluding to.
Yeah, I think he's alluding to Torah as a whole. And
As
so,
a whole, okay.
Yeah, I would say as a whole, because there's lots of instruction throughout, but the main concentration of instruction directly from the Lord is in Leviticus. I'm trying to remember the exact number, but like I like to say I think it's in Michael Heiser's
Heiser.
Not Heiser. It's not Heiser. It's Kaiser's Promised Plan of God
Oh, okay.
book, which is a single volume commentary on the entire Bible of a biblical theology. It's a fantastic resource if you don't have it. But he says in Leviticus that if we red lettered the Old Testament, almost the entire book, I think there's about 1 to 2 chapters total in Leviticus that would not be red letter. It says, and the Lord said to Moses, I'm not remembering I want to say it's something like 52 times in the book of Leviticus. So this is the word of God.
Right.
This is God speaking to Moses and by extension to the people. We have very few narrative situations, which we just read one of them in with the unholy fire, but there's very few narrative passages in Leviticus. It's entirely instruction from the Lord.
Wow.
And so,
I gotta get the title of that book from you. That sounds
yeah,
really
it's the
good.
Promised Plan of God,
Promise.
and it is just really delightful. So yeah, when he's talking about statutes and instruction, really, yes, it's referring to the Torah, but Leviticus is really the Torah.
Yeah.
Is really the instruction part of it. But I don't want to negate that there are not. I don't want to say there's no instruction and no statute and no
Right.
anything else in the rest of the Torah. But it's definitely concentrated here, which is why it's in the middle. It's also this interesting book that apparently we're just doing background on Leviticus Day.
It's Walter Kaiser.
Is it Walter Kaiser? Thank you. I was like, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel right. I knew the last name was Kaiser, but I was mixing Michael Heiser and Walter Kaiser in my brain.
Yeah.
They're not the same person. They're different. They're
The
very
Promised Plan of God, Walter
Kaiser, yes.
Kaiser.
Thank you.
How do you spell that?
K-A-I-S-E-R.
Okay, K-I-S-E-R. Thank you. Sorry for the bunch
No,
drill.
no,
but
no,
that-
you're fine. You're fine.
That was really good because I
You're
love
good. Yeah.
reading the Psalms, and I was always like,
Yeah.
statutes, precepts, what does
Yeah.
this mean?
Yeah, because essentially we can take the Torah and it becomes our, I want to say this the right way. It becomes an interpretive tool for the rest of the Bible, including the New Covenant scriptures.
Right.
Which is why it's so significant and so important that we continue to study the Torah year after year. Like I've been at KL almost 11 years. I can't say I've followed the Torah reading schedule diligently every single one of those years, but at least we'll say 7 out of the 10 that I've been here, I've read the Torah. And now, just within the last year or two, I'm like, oh, I see the Torah everywhere. In almost every other passage of scripture that I read, I know the Torah well enough now. There's still so much I don't know that I see it in almost every other passage I read in scripture. And that's actually kind of the point. That's the goal. That's why we study this. That's why we don't study the Torah this year, and then this the next year, and this the next year, and this the next year. And I'm not negating other parts of scripture, and I think we definitely need. This is why on our Torah reading schedule, if you don't have one of these, you should have one. They're on the book table. They're free. Please take one. Please use it. This is why it also we have selected New Covenant readings, but it's also designed so that we read through all 4 Gospels and Acts throughout the year. And I joke that I also really love Luke Acts. So when we read Leviticus, just because of the way they have lined it out, we also read Luke. And I'm like, this is delightful. We get to read Leviticus and Luke at the same time. And Leviticus is actually really helpful for understanding Luke. So,
wow, you just did the best promotion of that piece of paper I've heard.
It's beautiful. It's a list. There's
All
boxes.
this time, that gold has been right there.
If you're a check the box kind of person, there are boxes for you to check as you complete the readings. It's great, guys. It has all the holiday readings on
Yeah, I
it.
have it. Yeah.
Guys, this piece of paper is really helpful, and it's really nice, heavyweight like paper, so it's not gonna like get all torn up on you.
Oh gosh.
There's my sales pitch for the reading
It's so
list.
perfect where the notebook halls.
You're right. You're right. There are always improvements to be made.
But that's good.
That's hilarious.
I didn't
So-
know it was going through the whole book. I always thought it was like just a piece, but just the way you explained that helped.
Yeah,
Because
so-
I've been having a hard time sometimes reading it.
Yeah,
so-
it's confusing.
Yeah, because I didn't
It's
know
hard
it
to
was.
use.
I didn't know it was
So,
going through whole books. Yeah.
Since we're talking about this, I'll just continue to explain how this works. The date is also the week ending date on it. So like today is the 15th of April, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So that means that the scriptures that are on that line, you would have read them by today. So that's what you're reading. So this week it's this portion that we just talked about, Leviticus 9 through 11. And then it has, so let me clarify. So the Torah portion, so Genesis through Deuteronomy, we read the entirety of it throughout the year. The Gospels, all four Gospels and Acts, we read the entirety of throughout the year. The other portions are just selected portions. So this will not get you through the entire Bible in a year, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
It will get you through the entire Torah and the Gospels and Acts, and then it will give you selections of others. If you want to read, it will throw you off a little bit because the New Covenant passages are not exactly the same as on here. But if you want to read through the entire Bible in a year, that keeps with the Torah portion and keeps with the holiday readings, which like for example, for Passover we read Song of Songs. At Shavuot we'll read Ruth. There's different books of the Bible you read for different holidays. Jonah and Yom Kippur, thank you. If you want a scripture reading schedule that will get you through the entire Bible but keep with the Torah and the holiday readings, there is a schedule called the Bread of Life. They have a journal that you can get that has the readings in it, and they have an app that has the daily readings on it. So if you Google Bread of Life Messianic, you will find it. There's other Bread of Life thing. The Bread of Life is like you're going to come up with 10,000 hits, you know, if you just Google. But if you do Bread of Life Messianic, you'll find that reading schedule. It won't follow exactly like we do with this, but it will get you through the whole Bible in a year. And I've done it the last couple of years, and it's good. So there's my sales pitch about following reading schedules.
I have a
Thank
quick
you. It's
question.
encouraging.
Good.
I
Yes.
have a quick question. Why do you believe that Moses' sons, or when they were saying carry your cousins out, what did they do so necessarily bad? Was it the unclean versus did they do something?
What did who do?
The ones that died in Leviticus?
Yeah, what did they do what did the ones that died do?
Yeah, I don't want to be that.
Yeah, they brought fire into the presence of the Lord that was not what he commanded.
It was a strange fire?
Yes. So there was instruction to bring fire, to bring sacrifices and all these things that the Lord commanded, and it says that they brought an unauthorized fire that the Lord did not command. And we don't know exactly what that means. We don't know, but the point is that it was not what he commanded. And so the fire of the Lord comes and consumes them because they are trying to worship him in a way that he did not say to worship him. So I think that's all I got today. Thanks for, I know we jumped around a little bit,
This has been so good.
but it was fun. That's kind of how my brain was. That's kind of how my brain is right now. We jumped around a lot. So I'm going to bless the Lord. So thank you, Lord, for your Torah. Thank you for your instruction. Thank you for the Holy Spirit that helps us understand. Thank you for the way that you speak to us, Lord. Lord, I ask that your presence would stay with us through service. I ask that you would just be present with each person who's leading any part of the service. I ask that you would be with those who are teaching Shabbat school, with the security team, with everyone who is serving today, Lord. I ask that your presence would be known to every person serving and participating in worship today, Lord. I ask that you would unify our hearts and our minds around what you have for us today. I thank you for Shabbat. I thank you for your presence drawing closer to us, Lord, as we wait for the return of Yeshua and the fullness of your kingdom, Lord. I thank you that we get to taste a piece of it, Lord. So I thank you for all of these who have shown up to study your word, and for those online, Lord, and I just ask that you would continue to show us yourself through your word, Lord. B'Shem Yeshua.